between the two neighboring ethnicities during the 19th and 20th centuries. Examples can thus be found written by Armenian visitors to the Assyrian churches of St. Sergius and Bacchus at Mar Sergius and St. Hormuz at Dazgire, which are both local sites of pilgrimage. At the important church of St. Avdishar in the village of Tarmane, we also find graffiti belonging to one Sanvel Shahbazian from 1947. Indeed, these are the only Armenian inscriptions found on Assyrian churches, and they are quite personalized. They are generally just carved by visitors and pilgrims of Armenian ethnicity. Of a similar standing is the ancient Armenian stone church of St. Peter, Sur Petros, at the village of Qarabagh in the district of Anzal. The plaster of its interior is covered in graffiti in Armenian and Persian, as well as two examples in Assyrian. Whilst one bears the name of a visitor scratched onto the bare stone with a pebble, the other is written with pencil on the plaster and carries the date 24th of April 1926, the feast day of St. George, which would have been a day of pilgrimage for Christians all over the region to this ancient and venerable edifice. Another, more famous Armenian religious site, which is also a more frequent place of pilgrimage, is the monastery of St. Thaddeus at Qare Kelisa near Maku. Recent Assyrian visitors have noticed old graffiti in Syriac there. I haven't been able to verify this. In short, such graffiti are particularly significant in tangibly demonstrating the importance of pilgrimage sites to local Assyrians and Armenians and the close relationships which they shared in regards to the places which both peoples held to be sacred. So, this is an example of the stonework from the church of St. Sergius and Bacchus at Mar Sergius. It's a 6th century church, and here you can see Armenian very clearly. I mean, you can't really read it. I can't read it, but it's been scratched into the stones of the wall. And here you've got one in Assyrian actually. So this is in Assyrian, and that's in Armenian, by different visitors. As has been demonstrated, Assyrians and Armenians in the Urmia region, while speaking different languages, often functioned as one community due to their common Christian religion. They shared not only a strong spirit of solidarity with one another, but also deep marital and kinship ties. This is apparent in the way they coexisted with one another in the area's towns and villages, spoke each other's languages, attended one another's schools, churches, intermarried, and buried their dead in one another's cemeteries. It is truly an example that both communities can be proud of, and it is one repeated in other areas such as Urfa, Kharpert, Diyarbakir, Qamishli, and Baghdad. It shows how Assyrians and Armenians, throughout their whole many years of having a love-hate relationship, many centuries, can both cooperate with one another on many levels, having been neighbours since the dawn of time and since the ancient Assyrian and Urartian kingdoms. Let us hope such strong bonds continue into the future as we both seek recognition for our genocides, as well as justice and security for those of our peoples that still remain in the volatile Middle East. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For Q&A,
I'm going to try to use this. So, I will come to you if there are any questions.
May I ask what prompted you to take on this very complicated subject? I mean, was there one particular incident, one relative, or just doing something that no one else had done?
This presentation sprung as a result of my PhD thesis, or my doctoral dissertation. My doctoral dissertation was basically to write a socio-cultural history and write about the heritage of the Assyrians in the Urmia region. And to do that, I decided, I was a bit crazy. I was younger at the time. It was 5 years ago. I decided to go to Iran twice and conduct 2-month or 3-month fieldwork seasons, where I would basically survey as much as I can of the roughly 250 Assyrian and Armenian villages in the area. So I did what I could. I looked for basically churches, cemeteries, anything with any inscription on them. I've got to admit, I'm sort of biased. I mean, my study was about the Assyrians, but obviously when writing about the Assyrians in Urmia, you cannot not write about the Armenians. But I didn't collect everything that there is about the Armenians there. There are huge cemeteries in some of the Armenian villages with just thousands upon thousands of tombstones with inscriptions on them going back hundreds of years, especially the cemetery of Haftavan.
This is unbelievable. On the other note, I'd like to really know how many people we have in Iran now, Assyrian or Armenian, and does the Iranian government preserve or protect or help us to really preserve our archives here?
In Iran, I mean, I mentioned there are roughly 500 to 1,000 Armenians left in the Urmia region, and are about maybe 5,000 to 10,000 Assyrians left in that Urmia region as well. In the whole of Iran, I would say there's about 15,000 to 20,000 Assyrians left, and the estimates vary for the Armenians because you have big communities like Tabriz and Isfahan, and Shiraz and Tehran, etc. So the estimates go from between 150,000 to 300,000 Armenians. The Assyrians and Armenians have both been recognized as ethno-religious minorities in the 1908 Constitution of Iran. So the Armenians have two representatives in Iranian Majlis or Parliament, one for the northern part of the country, so Tabriz, and one for the southern part of the country, so Isfahan and Tehran. And the Assyrians also have one member of parliament. Recently, the Iranian government promoted 3 Armenian churches and monasteries, I think 3 or 4, in West Azerbaijan province to the status of World Heritage Site with UNESCO. So not only is the Iranian government protecting Assyrian and Armenian churches by placing them on their national heritage list and spending Iranian money, government money, to restore and keep these churches standing, but they're also trying to put a lot of them on the World Heritage List and get the world knowing about the Christian, Assyrian or Armenian heritage in Iran.
Could you explain the difference between the terminology of Assyrian and Syrian?
It depends on the context, it depends on who you're trying to describe, it depends on the geography, it depends on the time period, basically. Syrian can mean Assyrians, it can mean Arabs from the Republic of Syria, it can mean the ancient Assyrians, it can mean Syriac, it can mean a whole plethora of different things. If you want to return to the origin of the word Syria, the word Syria is basically a shortened form of Assyria. And the way that we can gauge this is basically from Armenian. Now, in Armenian, the Assyrians, or the ancient Assyrians who ruled the empire that we know of, so Shamiram, etc., they're called, I think, Asurestansi. So, Assyrians in general are called Asuri or Asuretsi. So, the difference between Asuri and Asuretsi is basically the difference between a higher stansi and a high, right? So someone that's a citizen of a state and someone that is an ethnic person living outside of his native state. Many people try and define the term Asuri as Syrian rather than Assyrian, but I think that theory has been debunked. But the Armenians actually are, since they have been the closest neighbors and the longest neighbors to the Assyrians, can probably bear the most effective witness as to the Assyrians, the modern Assyrians, and their ancient Assyrian ancestry.
Just one technical question. What is actually the difference between Syriac and Aramaic?
Well, Aramaic is a larger language, and Syriac is a dialect of Aramaic that began around the city of Edessa, or Urfa, in the 1st century AD, 1st century BC, roughly. Syriac, with the dawn of Christianity and the rise of Christianity through the city of Edessa, Syriac became, you could say, the official liturgical and administrative language of the Aramaic-speaking Christian churches. So, let me describe it this way. Aramaic is more like a language family, as opposed to Syriac, which is a literary version of the language, but doesn't encompass the whole gamut of dialects belonging to it. So, for example, just as you have Lebanese Arabic and Egyptian Arabic and Iraqi Arabic and Moroccan Arabic, there was also Levantine Aramaic, Babylonian Aramaic, and Assyrian Aramaic. And these were vernacular dialects that were not really written down until, at least in the scope of Assyrian Aramaic, or what is called Northeastern Neo-Aramaic. These weren't written down until the 1600s. So, a lot of the inscriptions that I showed, some are in Syriac, which is that ancient literary language similar to Krapar, which is used by the church, and some are in Assyrian or Neo-Aramaic, which is basically the spoken language used by the people.
In Urmia, during the genocide, was it affected? And if so, was Urmia pre-World War I under Persian rule or Ottoman Empire rule? And if it wasn't, then why did Assyrians decide to go down to Iraq and instead of maybe going into Urmia?
Urmia has always been under Persian rule. There were some border disputes in the early 20th century, and they were mostly centered around the Urmia region. The Assyrians and the Armenians in the Urmia region did suffer as a result of the genocide because the Turkish army invaded. And the Turkish army invaded basically in frustration after being defeated at the Battle of Sarikamish. So they basically stormed back, and one section of them, which later became known as the Qasab Tabore, or the Butchers Battalion, went and murdered all the Christians in Bitlis and in Sirt. And then the other half basically went to Iran and invaded. And they held Urmia and Salamas for roughly 3 or 4 months, until the Russians managed to bring back the forces and take it off them again. But in that period, as I said, for example, in the village of Hafturan, if you read the newspaper reports, they talk about hundreds of headless Armenian corpses buried in the wells of the village. And, you know, stories of those 75 young girls who ran into the lake and drowned themselves so that they wouldn't get raped by the Turks who came and invaded. That was just the first time that the Turks invaded, that the Ottomans invaded. The second time they invaded was in 1918, since the Assyrians and the Armenians in the area were basically sitting ducks. They'd run out of ammunition. The Russian Revolution had happened in 1917, so they were no longer helping. They'd abandoned these people, and these people were trying to maintain themselves in the Urmia and Salamas plains against the Kurds, against the Turks, and against whoever else wanted to come in and massacre them or attack them. They had to flee. Whoever stayed was basically massacred by the Turks that invaded. So out of 17,000 people that remained, Christian people that remained, only 600 survived.
Just a technical question again. You mentioned Chaldean. Is that also Assyrian, synonymous, or different?
Now, when people ask me that, especially Armenians, I try and look for an Armenian that knows these things, because I've been told by some Armenians that they call Chaldeans Asuri, they call Assyrians Asuri, and they call Syriac or Syriani, they call them Asuri as well. So they're all really the same. Chaldeans are just Catholics. They're people from the Assyrian Church of the East, so the Eastern Assyrian Church, as opposed to the Western Assyrian Church. So from the Eastern Assyrian Church that follow the Pope, basically. And since the 1500s, their church has been called the Chaldean Catholic Church.
Well, is there an East Assyrian and a Western Assyrian church?
There is. The Eastern Assyrian Church is the Assyrian Church of the East. The Western Assyrian Church is the Assyrian Orthodox Church of Antioch, or the Syriani, the Syrian or Syriac Orthodox.
Okay, and I was going to ask, what's the difference between those religions and, let's say, Armenian Apostolic?
Well, the Syrian Orthodox Church, which is the Western Assyrian Church, it's actually in communion with the Armenian Apostolic Church. Since they're both Miaphysite or Monophysite churches, they have the same Christology. And the difference between the West Assyrian Church and the East Assyrian Church is namely the Christology, since the East Assyrian Church is Diophysite, which used to be known as Nestorian, and they have two separate dialects, two separate scripts descended from the same script. They have two separate patriarchates and two separate structures of leadership. And basically, since the Western Assyrian Church was within the confines of the Byzantine or Roman Empire, they have more influence from that sort of Greek or Roman side, whilst the Church of the East was located mostly within the confines of the Persian Empire and has more influence from the Persians. That's the best explanation I can give.
Seriously, you're just trying to make Armenians feel better, but thank you. We appreciate it.
Just as an addenda, obviously you didn't go to Armenia.
I'm dying to go.
Because there's a large Assyrian community in Armenia.
Oh yeah.
And also there's a monument in Armenia dedicated to the Assyrians who died in the Holocaust.
It's on Abovyan Street.
It's on Nalbandian.
Nalbandian Street.
Nalbandian, Moscovian, and Kanjan.
That's the one.
Yeah.
It's by that little park.
That's
I've seen a photograph, but I'm dying to go.
And there's
I've got
also an
friends over
Assyrian
there.
flag flying over it. That was interesting. I didn't know they had a flag.
That's not. Yeah, we do have a flag.
Huh?
We do have a flag.
Well, that flag is flying over it
Well, that's
day and
fine.
night.
Well, thank you to the Armenian government for letting us have a monument there and fly our flag.
Oh, the Assyrians are citizens of Armenia.
Perfect.
Please stick around for refreshments and to chat. So thank you so much for being here tonight, Armenians, Assyrians, and others.